Hi, I'm Nancy Murphy from the Yellow Dot Artist, and today we are going to learn how to paint eggs and toast. Here are the colors that you need. When starting a sketch, you want to look at your reference photo to look for shapes. So if you look at the toast, it's really a square. So you make it a square, and then you add kind of like a muffin top or an M on top of it. Let it hang over. And this is the time to make corrections. So if you don't like something, you can erase it, make a new line. When you're ready to go on to the next step, just erase all the extra lines. And because the paint will be a little thicker, you need to add a more solid line so it's darker so you can see through the paint. It's time to tone the canvas, and all that means is to add burnt sienna and a little bit of water or a medium to make a very thin mixture of paint. And it just means to cover the entire canvas to hide all the white. It helps to give you a sense that you've already started the painting, although it's very easy. And it doesn't matter how you apply it. It can be sideways, up and down, it can be smooth, it can have drips, it doesn't matter. Next, you want to paint the underpainting, and it's kind of an exaggerated version of the sketch, except in paint. But during this, you want to mix the darkest dark paint. To mix that shade, you want to take your darkest paint, which is the burnt umber, and mix it with the sienna. Dampen a paper towel or a rag and wring it out so it's barely damp, and you're going to use that to mark out the lightest lights in the painting or the highlights. Here I'm trying to use a wet brush to get that out, but it's drying out, so I need a little bit more water, so I resort to the towel. And I'm drawing in the egg. Now I block in the darkest areas, which will be the crust, the outside crust. Always look at the reference photo so you can see where it is. You might even squint your eyes to help you see where the darkest areas are. And just go around the whole outside. Just kind of blend it in. As you move along in the painting, you might notice other lighter areas, so you can go back and forth between lightening those areas and darkening the darkest areas. This is the time to correct your painting, so when you actually add paint to it, you have a pretty good impression of what it's going to look like. So now we're going to move on to the background color. You're mixing white with a little bit of yellow ochre, or ochre. And if you don't like that color, you can add in other colors. Here I'm going to try a little bit of yellow. Painting can take a while to get the colors right. Still not happy with that, so looking a little too light for me. So I'm going to mix some yellow and sienna and mix that in, see if I like the tone. It's looking better, but still not quite right. So I'm going to mix a little black and yellow to get a green. You can vary the intensity by how much yellow or how much black you use. I like that shade. I'm adding it to the other mixture, and it's looking good. It's what I had in mind. So I'm going to apply it to the canvas now. And because you have that beautiful warm color underneath, you don't want to cover it completely. And I'm in fast motion here to speed it up. You want to leave bits and pieces of the background color in. Just kind of blend it Make the strokes all different shapes, sizes, and direction. Now I'm going to add the shadow to the toast. So I'm mixing a little of that green mixture to the background in a heavier amounts to make it darker. That's a good start. Now if you messed up and overdraw the lines, you can always go back with paint and correct it. So in order to help blend the side of the shadow, I wiped off the excess paint. And I'm just softly rubbing it to soften that straight edge. And I did a little too much, so I took some of the background color and wiped off a little bit of the top and bottom shadow. Now to add depth to the shadow, if you look at a shadow, it has a lot of different gradation of the shade. So I've taken a darker version of that shadow. I've wiped off the excess on a paper towel, and I'm going to run it along right next to the toast, the closest part. And don't put too much on there because you're going to have to blend it to make it soft. Again, wipe off the excess paint so it's dry, and go along the new line you added in the shadow to soften that. So it's a gradual transition from the darkest to that other shade of gray. Now you want to go back on the toast, and you see those straight lines or just sharp edges. You want to take your brush and just soften them. You might have to add a touch more paint to get a little more wet, or even just a dab of water, and then dry the brush and go along and blend. The goal is to have a lot of soft edges on the toast. I'm softening the shadow of the yolk and of the egg right there. The toast is going to have a bunch of different combinations of paint like you see here up on the screen, because toast isn't usually an even color, so you want to mix different variations. So here I'm making another pile right next to that first one with a slight different shade. I'm using my wide brush and I'm adding it to the inside of the toast. And again, just like the background, don't put a thick layer of paint to cover every inch of it, every speck of it. Let some of the underpainting colors shine through. It just adds a richness and a more realistic look. And go into that dark line. You want to blend them together. Add the yolk. Remember, just kind of keep the pattern of the brush in all different directions. It adds more interest and realism. Now we're going to add the burnt area to the toast. If you don't have burnt umber and black, use the darker shades of your paint, mix them together, wipe off the brush because you don't want a lot, and always look back at the reference photo and just kind of dab it or scrub it in just irregularly. And right there it's a straight line, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to soften it. At this point when you're softening, keep dabbing your brush on the paper towel to dry it, or you can even use a clean dry brush to get that blended look. It takes a lot of work and back and forth with the colors to achieve what you want. So here I'm mixing another shade with the combination colors, and I'm going to go in and add it irregularly again with different brush strokes, kind of dabbing, I don't like those lines I just added on the top left, so I'll come back and I'll soften those. And you want the gradual darkening to the light in the toast, the way it would be if you pulled it out of a toaster. Don't use a heavy brush stroke here. So I'm going back in and kind of rubbing those lines out because they're still a little bit wet. So it's a lighter shade. Right now I'm using an angled brush. You can keep using a flat brush as long as it has a straight edge to it. And just kind of irregularly adding it, blending it in with the darker. In order to achieve what you want, you have to keep going back with the different colors to really blend it. A mistake a lot of new painters make is that the lines are too solid and you go from a dark color to a lighter shade without a transition. So just keep rubbing them and smoothing them out. You can take another dry brush. A firmer brush works well when they start to get almost all the way dry, and just blend them out. And as you pick up more paint, wipe it off on the paper towel. Okay, now it's time to go to the egg white. And I'm using just solid white, and the color underneath is still going to shine through, and it'll give it a richness, a little depth. So you need 3 layers of the white paint, and at first just focus on doing a circle, just to kind of get the idea down. And for this, you're trying to achieve a smooth, silky texture, unlike the toast, which is a rough texture. So to do this, you keep your brush strokes long and straight and smooth. And it looks like a donut now, and unless you're using a mold when you cook an egg, it's not going to have that shape. So you want to go back and add a little irregularities. So while you're letting each layer paint or dry, go back and start working on the edges again and adding more color to the toast. I tap it, it's dry enough for the second and third layer. Okay, that's looking good. Now I'm going to use the raw sienna. This is a lighter shade than we've used, and sometimes you can add just a touch of white to that. And you're going to go and add it closer to the egg white because those areas are lighter. And just dab it on. You don't want to do full coverage. You're adding different textured layers to the toast. Okay, now the yellow ochre. Ochre, I keep calling it the wrong name. You're going to use this as the base layer of the yolk, but don't cover the shadow on the left-hand side. And again, you're achieving or trying to achieve a smooth texture. So use your flat brush or your angled brush, but don't cover up the far left shadow of the yolk. Now we're going to go with a very bright cadmium yellow and add that only on the middle and to the right. You leave the shadow exposed. And here I'm adding it a little more textured. I kind of like that sometimes. And if you add too much before it dries, you're going to move the paint around instead of paint on top of it. So if that happens, just let it dry. So now I'm going to use the burnt sienna, to work on the shadows while the yolk dries. And again, I applied in a straight solid line, but I'm going to go back and break it up by blending. I'm doing that now. And you don't put a shadow around the entire egg because the light is coming from the right side of the room. So the shadow is only going to be cast on the left side of the object. Once you apply, you want to go in and blend. So now I'm adding the dark umber, and I'm going to apply that right next to the egg, the closest to the egg, because that's always the darkest part on a shadow. And apply it very lightly. You can dab the brush on the paper towel and take off a lot of it to help with blending. And now I've done a mixture of black and white, just a dab of white, and I'm doing the shadow on the egg. And this is usually an irregular shadow because the egg isn't flat. It has little like peaks and valleys. So once you get enough of the shadow that you're satisfied, just go back and blend that in as well with a drier brush. And when the paint on the yolk is completely dry, you want to take a dry brush and blend the bright yellow with the darker shadow on the yolk. I'm just doing some more retouching as I notice the changes I need. I'm using a tiny brush that's very firm. It allows me to just get into the small areas. Now for the fun part, we're going to add pepper. So you take a little bit of black and you mix it with either medium or a little bit of water. Make it kind of a medium texture. You want to really load your brush up, and then you put it in front of the egg and you just kind of slide your finger from the bottom of the brush to the top, and it'll splatter paint on the egg and it'll look like pepper. And as you can see here, I have gone back and I've blended the egg yolk. Add as much as you want and you're finished. If you have questions, put them down below, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.